There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, but only one way to truly live, in constant fear that the next breath might be your last. On the ash-choked world of Kharis Reach, that fear became reality when the skies split with green fire and the ground trembled under the boots of 100,000 orcs. The Voxnet was already screaming when I, Commissar Wren, attached to the 132nd Verosian Infantry, stepped into the trench line overlooking the ruins of Hive Boran. Soldiers clutched their lasguns tighter as the horizon flickered with crude, ramshackle engines belching smoke. Orcs were coming, and they were coming fast. I could already hear their laughter, guttural, mad, and unstoppable. But this story isn't only about orcs. No, orcs are chaos made flesh, brute madness unleashed. Their war bands smash cities and burn worlds with blunt insanity. But they are not terror. Not true terror. That belongs to something else. Something that slithers in when the lights go out, when men scream and no one answers. This tale will show you the difference. If you crave more stories of the grim darkness of the far future, strike the subscribe rune and lend your faith to the Emperor. Every act of support strengthens the Imperium's voice against the dark. The green tide struck first at dawn. From our trenches, we watched the desert plain shatter under the wheels of war bikes and crude battle wagons. Their banners of red and black snapped in the foul wind, their glyphs daubed in gore and ash. Gretchens swarmed ahead like vermin, hurling themselves into lasfire just to clear the way for the charging knobs. And behind them, a stumper, taller than a cathedral, its cannons belching shells the size of men. I barked orders down the line, forcing discipline into terrified guardsmen. The 132nd was no green regiment. We had fought Tyranids on the fringe, traded fire with Tau skirmishers, but nothing prepared men for orcs. Their war was not tactics or logic. It was madness given shape. I barked orders down the line, forcing discipline into terrified guardsmen. The 132nd was no green regiment. We had fought Tyranids on the fringe, traded fire with Tau skirmishers, but nothing prepared men for orcs. Their war was not tactics or logic. It was madness given shape. I ordered, "Hold your fire until the Ozpex pings red." The machine spirit confirmed range seconds later, and the trench line lit with disciplined volleys. Las bolts cut swathes through the Gretchen tide. Heavy bolters roared, shredding war bikes. A Limonras barked, reducing an entire mob to red mist. For a moment, it seemed we could hold. Competence born from training, discipline forged in fire, the god proved its worth. Men cheered as orcs fell, as the stamper staggered under repeated demolisher hits. We dared believe the Emperor's hand was upon us. But orcs never break. Even as bodies piled high, their war cries grew louder, more insane. They fought like animals who knew only joy in destruction. Every guardsman who faltered, every lasgun that overheated was another step towards our collapse. Hours passed. Smoke and blood drowned the desert plain.
By dusk, the Orks had breached our outer defenses. Close combat raged in the ruins, bayonets against cleavers, las pistols against sluggers. I cut down 3 with my chainsword, the teeth screaming as it bit through green flesh. Each kill was a struggle, each Ork stronger than a man, fearless, driven by madness. And yet, in all this chaos, something gnawed at me. Some bodies of fallen guardsmen were simply gone. No trace of them remained, not dragged by Orks, not trampled underfoot, just missing. At first I thought it was the fog of war, confusion in the madness of battle, but when Vox units reported squads vanishing without a shot fired, unease curdled into dread. The Orks were terrible, but something else stalked us in their shadow. Something worse.
Night fell on Kharis Reach like a blade across the throat. Smoke from burning hab blocks and wrecked tanks choked the air, turning the stars into faint, flickering wounds in the sky. The Orks were still out there, their engines roaring, their bonfires crackling, their endless laughter carried on the wind like the sound of a world going insane. But within the trenches, a different kind of silence took root. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of fear. We expected another charge. The Orks were creatures of momentum, surging in endless waves. But instead of the usual thunder of their advance, the battlefield seemed to hesitate. Sporadic gunfire echoed in the ruins, followed by screams cut short. My Vox officer reported entire squads unresponsive. Patrols dispatched to reinforce them never returned. At first, I thought it was a feint, that the Orks had learned some crude trick, trying to lure us into breaking formation. But then Private Joran, a boy from the lower hive, swore he saw shadows moving through the smoke. Not Orks. Too quick, too quiet. And the bodies. Emperor preserve us, the bodies. We found men with no visible wounds, their faces locked in silent screams, skin pale as marble. Others were dragged into the darkness, leaving only blood trails that ended in nothing. Some we never found at all. It was in the early hours that we first heard them, a sound like laughter, but twisted, elegant, mocking, like the cruelty of a predator that enjoys the kill more than the hunger. Sergeant Kor spat in disgust, muttering prayers to the Emperor. He'd fought Orks his whole career. He knew their sounds, their madness, their fury. This was not them. I ordered the regiment to redouble their watch, to purge the Auspex scanners and keep the trench lamps burning through the night. We were fighting something unseen, something that thrived in fear, and fear was beginning to spread like a plague. By dawn, it struck. A sentry tower collapsed without warning, its guards screaming as they were pulled into the smoke. Lasfire lit the haze, but the shadows were already gone, moving faster than eyes could follow. We found one survivor, his armor shredded, his mind broken. He babbled about whips made of light and skinless angels of pain. His heart stopped before the Medicae could stabilize him. The Orks were restless. Their war cries grew louder, but they seemed confused, even agitated. For all their savagery, Orks fought openly, directly. This enemy was not like them. Whatever stalked us now was stealing their kills, denying them their madness-fueled joy. I knew then what we faced. I had read the forbidden reports, the censored logs hidden in the commissariat archives. There was only one foe that could do this: the Drukhari, the Dark Eldar, raiders from the webway, sadists from the shadows, feeding not on blood but on agony and despair. The Orks were madness, the Dark Eldar were precision. Together, they turned the battlefield into a nightmare where every moment was a choice between brutality and terror. Still with us in the darkness, hit that like button if this tale chills your soul. The Emperor's light must be kindled by those who believe. The raids grew bolder. Patrols vanished within meters of our lines. Tanks were found gutted, their crews strung up in grotesque displays. By the time reinforcements from the Astartes made planetfall, Kharis Reach was already slipping into a war unlike any the Guard had faced. And I feared, no, I knew, this was only the beginning.
The truth revealed itself, not in a grand charge or in the thunder of artillery, but in whispers, carried on the wind, echoing through the ruins, seeping into the ears of weary soldiers. By the third night, every man in the 132nd had heard them. Voices, mocking, seductive, cruel. They called us by name, they offered release, they promised pleasure, pain, eternity. Some guardsmen covered their ears, others prayed louder, but none could shut them out completely. The Orks, for all their brutality, suddenly looked almost sane. Their war bands still stormed the burning streets, bellowing WAAAGH cries, but the rhythm was broken. They fought not just us now, but shadows. Whole mobs of boys vanished into alleys, never to return. War bikes were found wrecked, their riders missing, only the smell of ozone and faint trails of blood left behind. And then we saw them, the Drukhari. They struck with elegance that bordered on artistry. Blades so fine they could carve through ceramite flashed in the half-light. Splinter weapons hissed, their crystalline shards burrowing into flesh, liquefying organs in seconds. Raiders in venom swooped from the skies, sleek silhouettes painted in midnight and cruel laughter. Witches danced through guardsmen with impossible grace, turning combat into performance, every scream a note in their twisted symphony. I watched as a squad of Kabbalite warriors descended upon an orc mob. The greenskins roared, swinging cleavers the size of men, but their fury meant nothing. The Drukhari cut them apart with surgical precision, their weapons leaving not just wounds, but agony. They didn't kill the Orks immediately. They drew it out, savoring each howl, each frantic swing, each drop of blood spilled into the ash. That was the difference. Orks craved destruction. The Dark Eldar craved suffering. One was madness, the other malevolence. Together, they turned the city into a crucible of horror. Our regiment tried to hold formation, to rely on discipline and firepower. Heavy bolters tore apart charging witches, flamers incinerated shadows as they darted between ruins. There was even a moment, fleeting but real, where the 132nd stood tall. Sergeant Kor led a countercharge into a Dark Eldar ambush, his squad fighting with brutal efficiency, bayonets finding alien flesh, laser fire burning through their shadow fields. For a heartbeat, men cheered. Competence, discipline, faith, it seemed enough. Then the screams began again. The Drukhari had not come for victory, they had come for us. Our fear, our agony, our despair, these were their weapons. They struck where morale was weakest, where faith wavered.
Guardsmen disappeared mid-battle, plucked away as if by the hand of some cruel god. Others were returned hours later, mutilated beyond recognition, still alive, still screaming. In the Voxnet, panic rippled. Reports of commanders dragged into the shadows, Voxcasters torn out mid-transmission, men turning their guns on themselves rather than face what stalked them. The Orks noticed too. Their WAAAGH began to fracture. Knobs bellowed louder, boys fought harder, desperate to prove themselves the greatest killers. The madness of their kindred spirit, combat, was being stolen from them, and in their rage they hurled themselves at both us and the Drukhari alike. And in the middle of it all, I felt the truth sink into my bones. This was no battle we could win, not against two foes, not against enemies so different, yet so perfectly destructive in their own ways. We were trapped in a nightmare where victory meant only surviving the night, if survival could even be called victory. Still, duty held me. The Emperor's gaze was upon us. To falter was heresy. So I stood in the trenches, sword in hand, watching as shadows and monsters tore the world apart around us, and wondered how many more souls would vanish before dawn. The whispers grew louder. They spoke not just in my ears, but in my thoughts. They knew me. They promised things no mortal should hear. And I feared that even I, a commissar sworn to the throne, might not withstand their lure forever. The Orks were mad, but the Dark Eldar were true terror.
The fourth night on Kharis Reach was hell made flesh. We no longer fought a single war. We fought two, overlapping, devouring one another. The Orks came first, screaming through the ruins like a tide of green muscle and iron. Their WAAAGH banners glowed red in the fires. Their engines roared like dying beasts. Whole mobs charged our lines with insane determination, heedless of the losses piling around them. Heavy weapons cut swathes through their ranks, and still they came. That was their madness. Not just violence, but joy in violence. But in their shadow the Drukhari danced. Sleek raiders skimmed over shattered manufactorum walls, their prows lined with hooked chains that dragged screaming guardsmen into the dark. Wyches vaulted through mobs of Orks, their blades glinting with unnatural speed, leaving green flesh in ribbons. Splinter fire hissed through the smoke, turning hardened veterans into convulsing husks. I stood at the command bastion with the Vox humming against my ear. "Sector 12 is gone," one officer reported, his voice ragged. "We held them." Static silence. Gone like so many others. By then, the Astartes had arrived, angels of death, a strike force of the Crimson Castellans, their crimson armor gleaming in the firelight, bolters thundering in disciplined rhythm. For a moment, their presence felt like salvation. They waded into the Orks like demigods, each swing of a chainsword felling another brute, each blast of a bolter reducing greenskins to shredded meat. But even they bled. The Drukhari were not Orks, not beasts to be broken by courage and firepower. They were precision, cruelty sharpened to a blade. Wyches darted around power armor, striking at joints and lenses. Incubi, armored in obsidian, met space marines in duels that shook the ruins. It was a clash of titans, fury against elegance, faith against despair. And we guardsmen, we were caught in between. Sergeant Corps' platoon fought like heroes, holding the hab block street by street. I watched him drag 3 wounded men to cover, firing his last pistol with his free hand, refusing to give ground. Competence, discipline, sheer stubborn courage, that was the Astra Militarum's strength. It bought us minutes, but minutes were all that ever bought. In those minutes, I saw the price. Guardsmen impaled on barbed hooks, hauled screaming into the sky, Marines dragged into the dark, their armor shredded, their gene-wrought bodies taken alive for torments I dared not imagine. Orks torn apart, not in glorious melee, but dissected piece by piece, their roars of defiance twisted into screams of anguish. The enemy was not just killing us, they were savoring us. I forced myself to the Vox, barking orders, trying to keep cohesion. Fall back to the inner trench, hold the Manufactorum choke point, armor to the east flank. My voice carried authority, but my heart knew the truth. This was not war. This was a harvest. The Orks pressed harder, their fury stoked by the theft of their slaughter. The Drukhari struck sharper, mocking their brutish rage, and we, the Imperium, were the meat between their blades. At one point, I thought I saw victory, the Stumper, its massive frame lumbering into the city, guns blazing, rockets screaming. It smashed into a raider formation, swatting sleek skimmers like flies. Orks cheered, their madness renewed. But the Drukhari adapted. They swarmed it, raiders latching on like carrion beasts. Dark lances burned through its armor, wyches clambered across its hull, carving into power conduits. Within minutes, the machine was collapsing in fire, its fall crushing hundreds of Orks underneath. The cheers died into silence, replaced by laughter that slithered through the night. That was when I knew there would be no triumph here, only survival, and even that was in doubt. The Emperor tests his servants in many ways. Some he demands courage, some he demands sacrifice. But here, on Kharis Reach, he demanded we endure the worst of two nightmares, Orkish madness and Drukhari terror, and somehow hold a line that had already crumbled. The tension builds. Subscribe to witness more tales from the dark millennium. And as I gripped my chainsword, its teeth humming like a caged beast, I whispered a prayer I had not spoken since boyhood. Not for victory, not for glory, but for death swift and merciful, because worse than death was coming, and I could already hear it laughing. By the fifth dawn, Kharis Reach was no longer a world. It was a wound in the fabric of reality, torn open by madness and cruelty. Smoke shrouded the hive spires, the air reeked of blood and ozone, and the Vox crackled with broken prayers. The Orks still bellowed their insane joy in destruction, but their war had lost its rhythm, fractured by something darker, sharper. The Drukhari were everywhere, cutting in and out of reality like shadows through flame. We had no lines left, only pockets of resistance. The Crimson Castellans fought like gods among ruins, their bolters singing hymns of vengeance. Sergeant Corps and what remained of the 132nd clung to the Manufactorum district, Lasfire flickering weakly against the night. I moved among them, chainsword in hand, faith my only armor, reminding them with each word that the Emperor still watched, though even I could not banish the hollow look in their eyes. It was then that the worst came. Not an Ork charge, not a Drukhari ambush, but a choice. Voxcasters picked up faint transmissions,
An evacuation corridor had opened near the spaceport, held tenuously by a surviving Castellan squad. There was a chance, slim but real, to extract survivors. But to reach it, we had to pass through a war zone where Orks and Drukhari clashed in fury. The order was mine to give. I weighed it in silence, hearing the laughter of the Dark Eldar echoing in my skull. Stay, and we would be whittled down to nothing. Move, and we might survive, but at what cost? Move, I said at last. By squads, cover one another. No man left behind. The retreat was a nightmare. Witches darted between shadows, pulling men from formation. Orks bellowed and charged, their cleavers shattering stone as they hurled themselves at anything that moved. Splinter fire hissed, lasguns blazed, bolters roared. We fought step by step, each meter bought with blood. I remember Private Joran falling, his chest torn open by a shard of splinter fire. I remember Kor hauling him up, dragging him even as his own leg bled. I remember the Castellans covering our flank, their crimson armor turning black with soot, their sergeant chanting oaths even as an incubus split their breastplate. They held until they fell, every last one of them. We reached the corridor at last, a charnel path littered with corpses. The Thunderhawk engines thundered above, the promise of escape. But not all made it. Dozens were seized by barbed hooks, pulled screaming into the dark. Others were trampled beneath orcish boots, their bodies crushed before our eyes. When the gunship's ramp finally closed, only a fraction of the 132nd remained. As the craft tore skyward, I looked down at Kharis Reach. The hive burned like a pyre, the city drowning in shadows. Orks still raged, their madness unchecked, but even their fury seemed diminished by the precise cruelty of the Drukhari. What they had not destroyed, they had claimed. What they had not claimed, they had broken. We survived, but survival is not victory. The Imperium would declare the planet lost, the war unwinnable. The Orks would find another battlefield. The Drukhari would return to their dark city, their souls sated on the agony they had harvested. And we carried the memories, the screams, the laughter. The truth that in the 41st millennium there are fates far worse than death. The Emperor demands we endure, and so we endure. But I will never forget the lesson of Kharis Reach. Orks may be madness, but the Dark Eldar are true terror.
Kharis Reach was written off as a dead world within weeks. The Orks, denied their true battle, eventually drifted on, their WAAAGH hungry for fresher prey. The Drukhari vanished as they always do, leaving only shadows, screams, and memories. For the Imperium, it was another name on a long, long list of worlds lost to the darkness. For those of us who survived, it was a scar. Not the kind you see on flesh, but the kind that cuts into the soul. We had seen the difference between madness and malice. The Orks fought for destruction, yes, but at least their brutality was honest. The Drukhari fought for cruelty itself, pain as currency, suffering as art. To face them both together was to stand on the edge of sanity, knowing that every breath might end in torment. And so we remember, not to despair, but to warn. The galaxy is vast, its horrors endless. Against some, courage and discipline may hold the line. Against others, only faith can keep a man from breaking. The Emperor's light burns eternal, but at what cost?